Have you ever come face to face with a pit bull? I mean, you and the pit bull unleashed, no restraints whatsoever. The pit bull is barking. He's not happy, very angry. I'm going to tell you about my experience with a pit bull rather, just last week, coming up in just a couple minutes. Okay, what is it about a happy Aspie that makes a happy Aspie happy? Now, we know that being an Aspie, Asperger syndrome, people with Asperger syndrome tend to have a problem with depression. It's a little bit challenging to find an Aspie who is a happy Aspie, but they are out there. And of course, sometimes we're happy, sometimes we're not. But when we are happy, what is it that makes us happy? Well, we got for you 5 things. When we get to number 5, I'm going to tell you about my encounter with Pitbull. You're going to love this because it really does apply to what we're talking about. Number 1 is this. A happy Aspie understands that it is normal to be abnormal. Little explanation. Okay, I got that for you. When we say it's normal to be abnormal, what we mean is that nobody is normal. I mean, everybody, this is kind of obvious, right? Everybody has a flaw. Everybody has something that is not consistent with everybody else. We are all individuals. You take 2 perfectly identical twins. Well, you can't because there are no perfectly identical twins. Everybody's different. So take 2 identical twins. They're not perfect. They are different. They are individuals. They all have flaws. So one of the problems that we have as Aspies is we tend to compare ourselves with everybody else. And everybody else seems to be more centered than we are because they understand things that just naturally, innately, they understand things we just don't get, like socializing. So we find ourselves often at the very bottom rung of the proverbial totem pole, socially speaking. There is a term for that. I'm sure you've heard it. It's called social failure or social defeat. And seems like we are always on the bottom rung. It doesn't matter whether it's at the workplace, the school, the church, the neighborhood, the social event. We just don't seem to fit in. And we say, well, we're just different. And that makes us unhappy. But what if we realize that being different is normal? That we're not different, we're not abnormal because, well, everybody is abnormal, therefore, that's normal. Does that make sense to you? Well, if it does, that will help make you a happy Aspie. Number 2 is this, what I call diminished brain freeze. Now, brain freeze is not a clinical term. Rather, I think the term that most people would use rather than brain freeze is inhibition. When you're in social circumstances, often one-on-one, your brain goes into this state of deep inhibition, self-consciousness. You have trouble speaking. You are overwhelmed with a sense of inferiority. I call that brain freeze. Typically, brain freeze is associated with eating ice cream, but I call it brain freeze because it seems like our mind just goes in the state of minds go in the state of inactivity. They're just kind of stuck in the mud. So we're frozen in place. We are inhibited. We can't think straight. Our words are jumbled. We can't make a sentence. We're just frozen. What happens is that makes happy Aspies happy is we learn to get out of that brain freeze. And that makes us happy. Once you learn to overcome that, and I don't think you ever totally overcome it, but you learn to contend with it, you learn to deal with it, that is when we transition from being unhappy and depressed to being happy. Well, how do you do that? Well, hang on. Number 5, when we talk about the pit bull, we're going to talk about that. Number 3 is this. Self-acceptance is something that is that element, I think the key element that makes us happy Aspies. Now, when I say self-acceptance, understand, I'm not saying the same thing as being indifferent, but we need to get to that point in time that point in our lives where we realize that reality is what it is. Sounds kind of redundant, doesn't it? Realize reality. But yeah, this is who we are. And that's not necessarily a flaw. A lot of people have flaws. You know this. All kinds of. We talked about that. Number one, nobody's perfect. But when we understand that people with, say for example, a person who's blind, they accept it. They go on, particularly if they were born that way. And most Aspies, as far as I know, all of them, were born with Asperger syndrome. Now, you may not have been, it may not have been detected till later in life. Usually, preschool years or shortly after, 5, 6 years old. But it's always been there, in my opinion. So we just accept that. A happy Aspie is somebody who doesn't tie his or her happiness to experience. Everyone has bad experiences. But we get this thought in our mind, and I think it's very harmful that we feel like that for some reason our entire life is a continuum. One constant, nonstop difficulty, challenge that we simply cannot overcome. And I get it. That's very real. That is true. But somebody who is deaf has that same obstacle. Somebody who has lost a limb has that same obstacle. The difference is we're not talking about something that is physiologically apparent, but something that is psychologically or neurotically, call it an impairment if you will, so it's not visible. It doesn't elicit empathy or sympathy from others, and they often misunderstand it or misinterpret it as being something like being aloof or being inferior. But we live with that our entire lives. But once we understand that this is the hand that is dealt us, and instead of complaining about it, we apply tactics, we apply principles that help us to live our life within that sphere of reality. This is who we are. We cannot escape it. In fact, if we accept ourselves as we are, that we have traits that are actually superior to others, a lot of traits, that just because we're different doesn't make us flawed, doesn't make us bad. So we accept ourselves. Now, again, I'm not saying we be indifferent about it and deny it and say it's not there, but we just accept it, and that makes a happy Aspie happy. Now, number 4 is this: indifference to other people's opinions. Now, this is a little bit challenging. It's a little bit hard to come to terms with because you're constantly faced with other people's rejection. Their opinion of you many times, oft times, sometimes all the time, is that you are in fact inferior. You are a flawed person. So what? So who cares what that person thinks? The reality is that if a person thinks that you are flawed when you are not flawed, well, that person has the problem. That changes everything. Many years ago, when I was a pastor of a small church in Indiana, we had a little black kid who came to our church, a little black boy. I don't remember his name. I think his name was Bobby, but I just say that. I'll just make up a name. But he came to me in tears. This was, he must have been 4 or 5 years old. He came to me in tears after church because he said that Tommy punched him. I guess Tommy punched him in the nose. Now, I knew Tommy punched everybody. But little Bobby, little black kid, said, I asked him why first, and he said, because I'm black. He doesn't like me because I'm black. So what was Bobby doing? Well, Bobby was internalizing the blame. It wasn't his fault. I mean, Tommy didn't punch him because he's black. Tommy punched him because Tommy's a bully. But he was internalizing that and blaming himself. That's what Aspies do. We say it's our fault because we are the way we are. No, it's their fault. If somebody rejects you because of the way you are, they are the ones with the problem, not you. What are you feeling about? They are the ones who should feel bad, and if they don't feel bad, well, that just compounds their flaw. They're even worse than we thought. I had a neighbor, a little old neighbor lady. This is, probably 20 years ago. And we were talking, as neighbors tend to do, Just, she was in her yard and I was in my yard doing lawn work, and conversation turned to the plumber. She had had a plumber who had come to her house and overcharged her, in her opinion, didn't do the work the way that she thought it should be done, and the guy charged her more money than she thought she should be charged, and she said, the guy took advantage of me because I'm a woman. She was doing the same thing Bobby was doing. She was blaming herself. Somehow it's my fault because I am a woman. He was taking advantage of me, she said, because I am a woman. Now, what I didn't tell her, but I probably should have, was that I hired that same plumber a few weeks earlier, and he did the same thing to me. I'm pretty sure I'm not a woman. In other words, well, I know I'm not a woman, but the point is, it wasn't her fault. She was internalizing it. She was blaming herself. The truth is, the plumber was a crook. That's it. The blame goes on him. And when you are rejected because you have Asperger syndrome, and you are, you always have been, you always will be. You will be repulsed, you will be repelled, you will be rejected, and something else that starts with an R. It's not your fault. You are not to blame. You did not make yourself this way. You didn't make yourself black. You didn't make yourself a woman. You didn't make yourself a person with Asperger syndrome. And if someone rejects you because of an immutable trait, and it is an immutable trait, you're not to blame, period. So a happy Aspie learns to be indifferent. And the key word there is learned. Learns to be indifferent. Okay, learns. Learns to be indifferent to others' opinions. Number 5 is this. Okay, let's get to the pit bull. Happy Aspies are those who learn to respond rather than to react. Now, most every day I take a walk like 2.5 miles. I figure that burns up 250 calories that I would not burn up otherwise. So do the math. 7 times 250, so I'm burning up however many that is. What is that? 1,750 maybe per week. Yeah, that's almost like fasting an entire day, depending on what your calorie count is. All right, so I'm out walking, and as I'm coming back to the house, I hear somebody yelling. I hear a dog barking, and I turn around, and there's this pit bull coming at me. Apparently, the pit bull got out of the house, and the owner was yelling at him instead of chasing him. I think he should have come after him, but the pit bull was after me. So what did I do? Well, I have learned when a dog chases you, and I'm not a dog trainer, I'm not a dog psychologist, but I just learned from experience that if you run from them, they'll chase you even more. So I just stopped, and I turned around, and I faced the pit bull. And the pit bull got closer, and then he stopped. And he stood there. He growled and snarled and barked a little bit. And in the background, you could hear the owner yelling at him like his voice is some kind of a leash that it pulls the dog in. I don't know why dog owners do that. Put a leash on your dog, jeez. But I just stood there, and I always carry a cane with me for just such emergencies. And I just pointed my cane directly at his nose, and I stood there. And finally the dog stopped barking. Now here's the key. That fear that overcomes you when you're startled by something like this, that just dissipated. No fear whatsoever. Hard to do, but I had no fear whatsoever. I just understood that this is a dog, and dogs love fear. I'm not going to be afraid. I just stared at the dog. And after a while, you could tell from his face, and dogs don't make a lot of expression with their faces. They snarl and that, but that's a human trait. But you could tell in his face, he just kind of calming down. He realized I wasn't going anywhere. I wasn't prey to be chased, and quite frankly, I was bigger than he was. What's more, I had a stick. So we just stood there for a few seconds and just kind of stared at each other. And then, I took a step forward, and he took a step backwards, and finally, he kind of looked away to the side, and then he turned around, and he ran back to his owner. What does that have to do with being an Aspie? Well, sometimes we get into this state of mind that I call brain freeze, where we are inhibited. And what happens is we are overcome with, well, it's fear. Not the same kind of fear that you would face when you're encountering a pit bull, but it's a fear of people. Anthrophobia is what I call it. I don't know if that's a clinical term, but that's what I call it. Anthrophobia, fear of people. And when you're in that state, stop. Think. Take a deep breath if you have to. Probably don't want to point your stick at somebody, but, just kind of think about the moment. Focus on your fear. Ask yourself, why am I afraid? Now, I've tried that same tactic when I'm talking to individuals. And I just relax. Now, the fear doesn't go away completely, at least with me, it never has, but it helps me to control it. It helps me to manage it. So number 5 is, when we are in those positions, we learn not to react in fear, which is very natural, but we do something that is extra natural. Don't want to say supernatural, because we're not super people. Do something that is extra natural. That is take control. That we respond. Stop. Breathe. Think. Or stop. Think. Breathe. However you want to do it. Or you can breathe first and, But focus on your fear. Why am I afraid? What is it about this person that makes me inhibited? That makes me so self-conscious? And again, it may not go away completely, but at least you're in control of it, that inhibition. Now, it's not controlling your mind, but your mind is controlling it. And when you do that, what you will discover is that you will be a happy Aspie. And that's what makes Aspies happy, is they learn to control their fear rather than letting their fear control them. Yeah, go ahead. Click on one of those triangles that you see on the screen, because we just got a lot more to talk about, and the videos that we make are as fresh today as they were the day we made them. So indulge yourself and let's keep this going.